People always debated, who's the greatest player of all time? Dumb question. It should be, who's the greatest team of all time? You know, there are so many teams to choose from. The 91 Chicago Bulls, sorry Showtime. The 92 Bulls, back-to-back. The 93 Bulls, first three-peat. The 97 Bulls, even with the flu. 98 Bulls, no push-off. And my favorite, the 96 Chicago Bulls. 72 wins. Tough to beat that. What? You think there's someone else? Proof.
Dynasty. Total dominance. Greatness. There are just so many ways to describe what a dynasty should be. And if there was ever a team in NBA history that embodied it, a team that was so good that for years many believed they won the game before it even started, then it's the Chicago Bulls of the 90s. From the management and front office to the superstars that emerged from this team, let's take a look at one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history, the Chicago Bulls.
What is the greatest NBA team of all time?
When I look at that 1995-96 team, the Chicago Bulls, when they won 72 games, that team was awesome from wire to wire. We had an all-star break where the Chicago Bulls had lost 5 games. That's it. They were rolling. We're talking about a team that not only did they have the best player in Michael Jordan, they had the best all-around player in the game in Scottie Pippen, they had the best rebounder in the game in Dennis Rodman, they had the best bench player in Tony Kukoc, they had the second best long ball shooter in Steve Kerr. So with all of that being said, you put those things together, you get 72 wins. They also had 3 guys, count them, Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan, and Dennis Rodman, to be first-team all-league defenders. That has never happened in the history of the NBA, and it hasn't happened since.
In an era that had legendary teams with multiple Hall of Famers, like the Detroit Pistons, the Houston Rockets, the Utah Jazz, the Phoenix Suns, the Seattle Supersonics, the Portland Trail Blazers, and even the New York Knicks, the Chicago Bulls swept through every single franchise to win 6 championships. From the Detroit Pistons' bad boys to the iconic duos of Karl Malone and John Stockton, Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler, and Gary Payton and Sean Kemp, none could stop the Chicago Bulls. Not even Charles Barkley's Phoenix Suns stood a chance. It was total and complete dominance, and it all started in 1990. In the first 2 decades of the Chicago Bulls' existence, they never made it past the Eastern Conference Finals. Even after drafting who would be the greatest basketball player of all time, Michael Jordan, the team never made it past the Milwaukee Bucks, Boston Celtics, or the Detroit Pistons' bad boys. Well, 2 consecutive Eastern Conference Finals losses to the Detroit Pistons bad boys, and it all changed in the 1990 offseason. Many who remember the Chicago Bulls dynasty credit their legendary run to Michael Jordan, since it all began and pivoted around him. However, the true architect of that dynasty is none other than Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson's triangle offense helped maximize the talents of the 1990 to 1991 roster, inevitably forming a team of key players like Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant, and a formidable supporting cast that provided the depth required to complement Michael Jordan's unparalleled scoring ability. That team finished the regular season with a 61-15 record, their best regular season since the 1966 to 1967 season. The 1990-91 Bulls finished 4th in offensive rating, scoring 101 points per 100 possessions. At the end of the season, MJ led the NBA in scoring and won his 2nd MVP award. However, the real magic of what this dynasty was about to be unfolded in the playoffs as the Bulls embarked on a historic run. On their way to the 1991 NBA Finals, the team ran through the New York Knicks, Philadelphia 76ers, and the Detroit Pistons, losing just 1 game. They completely swept the Detroit Pistons bad boys, who had stopped them from the NBA Finals in the previous 2 seasons. John Paxson sank 2 big free throws, and Horace Grant added a huge hoop to complete the sweep. A new sheriff was in town, and the rest of the Eastern Conference teams were in trouble. Now, the iconic Los Angeles Lakers, led by the legendary Magic Johnson, stood in the way of Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls' first ever championship. And it all turned out to be a mismatch, as the Bulls won the series in 5 games. In that series, Michael Jordan averaged 31.2 points on 55.8% shooting, 11.4 assists, 6.6 rebounds, 2.8 steals, and 1.4 blocks per game. On that 1991 winning team, Michael Jordan was the only Chicago Bulls player who made the All-Star team and the All-NBA team. In fact, Scottie Pippen didn't even make the all-defensive first team in 1991. The 1991 season was a defining moment in the history of the Chicago Bulls. So much so that both Jordan and Scottie were sure they could win the championship the following year.
Great organization and the wonderful fans of Chicago.
We all as players really thank you all for your support, and we all want you to know that this one is for you. But we're going to be back here next year for another long struggle.
Fast forward to the following season, and the Chicago Bulls drew more attention than they had before. They were the defending champions, and everyone in the NBA wanted to beat them. In the 1991-1992 season, the Bulls finished with a league-best 67-15 record, more wins than they had in the previous season. They stayed competitive every night, and it wasn't a surprise that they remained competitive in the playoffs, beating the Miami Heat, a New York Knicks team that is highly regarded as one of the greatest defensive teams in NBA history, and then the Cleveland Cavaliers. The 1992 NBA Finals was set between the Chicago Bulls and the Portland Blazers, between Michael Air Jordan and Clyde the Glide Drexler. In just Game 1, Jordan scored a record 6 3-point field goals, and at the end of the series, he averaged 35.8 points, 4.8 rebounds, and 6.5 assists per game, while shooting 52.6% from the floor. The Bulls won the series 4-2 to lift their second consecutive championship. But 2 didn't make their dynasty. It was the third that did that. In the 1992-1993 season, the Bulls won 57 games and faced a Dominic Wilkins-led Atlanta Hawks in the first round of the playoffs. They swept the Hawks and the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then beat the New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference semifinal to face the Charles Barkley-led Phoenix Suns in the 1993 NBA Finals. A three-peat. For 3 consecutive years, the Chicago Bulls had won the NBA championship. A dynasty had arrived. And what better way to announce that the NBA has a new dynasty than the fact that this team was the first since the Boston Celtics, who had won 8 consecutive championships, to three-peat. The Chicago Bulls were now the model, but unfortunately, as high as the team was, as great as it was at the time, it all came crashing down.
When I lose the sense of motivation and the sense to prove something as a basketball player, it's time for me to move away from the game of basketball.
The one player who was the core and pivot of the Chicago Bulls dynasty, Michael Jordan, decided to retire from the game of basketball to pursue a baseball career. Without Michael Jordan and with Scottie Pippen leading the team, the Chicago Bulls were looking to add one more championship for the 4th consecutive season in the 1993-1994 season. The team added new faces like Tony Kukoc, Bill Wennington, Luke Longley, and Steve Kerr. And with Scottie Pippen leading the new face Chicago Bulls, they ended the season with a 55-27 record, just 2 less wins than they did the previous year when MJ was on the roster. Unfortunately, without Michael Jordan, the Bulls were a new team to beat. The team didn't make it past the Eastern Conference semifinals as the New York Knicks beat them in a 7-game series. The 1994-1995 season was even more horrible. The new-faced Chicago Bulls struggled for a playoff spot, and by mid-March, they had a 31-31 record. But with no hope in sight, the franchise player returned. Before Jordan returned to the court, the Bulls were 34-31. After his return, they finished the season on a 13-4 run to make it back to the playoffs. But sadly, Michael's return could not take the team back to the NBA Finals for the second time in 2 seasons. The team lost the Eastern Conference semifinals to the Orlando Magic in a 6-game series, and this is despite Michael Jordan averaging 31 points, 6.5 rebounds, 3.7 assists, 2.5 steals, and 1.8 blocks in that series. Unfortunately for the rest of the league, after 2 seasons without a finals appearance and the full return of Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls were motivated to show everyone in the NBA that while the first three-peat was great, they could do it again. They were out for revenge, and as such, the Bulls added power forward and rebounding specialist Dennis Rodman to the 1995-1996 roster. That season, the Chicago Bulls dominated the league like never before. They started the season with a 41-3 record and ended with a 72-10 record. 72 wins out of 82 regular season games was unprecedented. In the 1995-1996 NBA season, the Bulls won the second most home games to start a season with 37 wins, losing the streak in a 1-point loss to the Charlotte Hornets on April 4, 1996. On the road, the Bulls were a menace, winning 33 games and going on an 18-game winning streak that season. Almost every single team in the NBA was scared of facing them. The offense and defense were far too superior to the rest of the league. That team led the NBA with 105.2 points per game, while their defense held teams to only 92.9 points a night, the third best record in the league at the time. The 1995-96 Chicago Bulls had both the best offensive and defensive rating in the league. However, all of this means nothing without a ring. 72-10 don't mean a thing without the ring. So, their charge for another championship started on the 26th of July, 1996, against the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat at the time had a front court of all-stars, Alonzo Mourning and Tim Hardaway, and were coached by the legendary Pat Riley. But that didn't matter, as the Bulls swept them in the first round to meet their familiar foe, the New York Knicks, in the second round. As tough as the New York Knicks looked, they were no match for the Chicago Bulls, who won the series 4-1 to advance to face the Orlando Magic, who had won 60 games in the regular season. Their opponent was the third seed and was led by the powerful duo of Anthony Hardaway, who was third in MVP voting, and a young Shaquille O'Neal. But once again, none of this mattered to the 96 Bulls. The Chicago Bulls swept the Orlando Magic to make it to the NBA Finals for the first time in 3 years. Now the stage was set for their fourth championship against the second seed Seattle Supersonics, led by All-Stars Shawn Kemp and Gary Payton, who was the Defensive Player of the Year and led the league in steals. The Bulls dominated the first 3 games of the series, but could not complete the sweep after they allowed the Sonics to make the series 3-2. Unfortunately for the Sonics, the Bulls weren't letting them win more than 2 games. By the 6th game of the series, it was a wrap. The 1995-96 season is highly regarded as one of the best seasons for any NBA team. A 72 regular season win, with an NBA championship to crown it. At the time, the discussion surrounding the Bulls was now how they could possibly outperform the 95-96 season, not whether they could win a championship. Interestingly, they almost did in the 96-97 season. The team was just 3 wins short of a second consecutive 72-win season. On their way to the 97 NBA Finals, the team beat the Washington Bullets, Atlanta Hawks, and the Miami Heat, losing only 2 games. The 97 NBA Final was set between the Chicago Bulls and the Utah Jazz, and it was nothing short of memorable. The final was beyond the team, and it was also a matchup between Michael Jordan and Karl Malone, who had beaten Jordan for the NBA MVP award in a tight race. The entire series was remarkable, as it featured 2 of the more memorable clutch moments of Jordan's career: the Game 1 buzzer-beating jump shot, and the flu game. By the end of the 6th game in the series, the Chicago Bulls had won their 5th NBA championship, but could they three-peat again? Well, they answered that question in the 97-98 season. The Chicago Bulls ended the season with a 62-20 regular season record, but this season would turn out to be their toughest one yet. The team swept the New York Nets and lost just 1 game to the Charlotte Hornets in the second round of the playoffs. However, for the first time since Michael Jordan first retired, a team took the Chicago Bulls to Game 7. The Indiana Pacers, led by Roger Miller, were a tough nut to crack. In fact, nobody came close to ending the Bulls dynasty more than Reggie Miller's Pacers. But unfortunately for Miller and the Pacers, the Bulls dynasty wasn't ending at the hands of any NBA team. For the second straight year, the Chicago Bulls faced the Utah Jazz in the NBA Finals. The stage was set between the Bulls and the Karl Malone and John Stockton-led Utah Jazz. For the second time in the NBA Finals, the Bulls didn't have a home court advantage, and for the first time since the 1991 NBA Final matchup against the Los Angeles Lakers, the Chicago Bulls lost Game 1 of the NBA Finals. Luckily, that loss didn't leave any room for panic, as they won the next 3 games of the series to take a 3-1 lead, before later losing the 5th game of the series. And on the 14th of June, 1998, at the Delta Center, Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls made history, with 27 seconds left on the clock. 6 championships, 2 three-peats, only 2 elimination games played over 6 championship runs, and a 388-104 record in 6 championship seasons. This was a dynasty like never before. In both three-peats, only Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Phil Jackson were around. From 1991 to 1998, the Chicago Bulls dynasty faced 7 60-win teams and 12 55-win teams in the playoffs, defeating Hall of Famers like Isaiah Thomas, Magic Johnson, Clyde Drexler, Dominic Williams, Charles Barkley twice, Patrick Ewing 4 times, and Reggie Miller and Dikembe Mutombo once. They also beat the duos of Shaquille O'Neal and Anthony Hardaway, Gary Payton and Sean Kemp, Tim Hardaway and Alonzo Mourning, and John Stockton and Karl Malone twice. During those 6 playoff runs, the Chicago Bulls faced 14 top 10 teams in defensive ratings. 2 of them finished first, 4 in the top 3, and 8 in the top 5, with 5 of those 14 teams making it to the finals. Sadly, like all dynasties, the Chicago Bulls dynasty had to end, and it did immediately after their 6th championship. Michael Jordan retired for the 2nd time, Phil Jackson stepped away from basketball, and Scottie Pippen, Steve Kerr, Dennis Rodman, and Ron Harper all left the team for another NBA team. The 1998 title truly marked the end of the Chicago Bulls dynasty, a dynasty that will always be remembered as one of the greatest, if not the greatest.